It's Cardboard Time, episode number 87, and I'm your host, Arwen Kathke. On today's episode, we have a review of Letter Jam and an interview with Amanda Vallerand. So a little bit of a lighter review section today, but I did want to give that interview a little bit of time to breathe. And why don't we go right into the Shelf of Aspiration? The update is at 141. That is down by 3 since last episode, so pretty proud of that. I'm really hoping that by next episode, I am going to get that number down below 140. As long as nothing crazy happens and I get a bunch of Kickstarters in or, a major sale that I don't foresee happening happens as well. So I'm going to try to be good. I'm going to try to make sure that I'm not going to buy a bunch of games in the meantime. But 3 games that did come in from that recess sale. The large version of Quirky Circuits. So I did mention in my review of Quirky Circuits, I was looking for the full version, not the Barnes & Noble version that I have, which is smaller. And I did pick that up for $10 at the recess sale, so very happy about that. I will probably be giving away my smaller version of Quirky Circuits to somebody with, kids, somebody that's got a family that can really appreciate that as well, now that I have the large version. So I also picked up Godspeed, and this is a game that I've already played. It's specialized worker placement. A very, very interesting game. And I did see a few copies of this for sale in different places, but it's always been the standard edition. And I really wanted something with the deluxe components that were put out. And finally did find one at the sale for $25. So love that. Glad that that is in my collection now. I've been wanting that for quite some time at this point. And then finally, Twilight Inscription. I did pick that up at the sale for $20. So that was amazing. And I'm glad that I didn't have to spend $60 for it. Love giant roll and writes. And this one seems like the biggest roll and write to date that you can find. As far as I know, nobody's made, like a larger roll and write than this. 4 sheets and all sorts of crazy stuff going on. I'm looking forward to it for sure. So look forward to a review on that very soon, because I don't think it's going to go unplayed for very long. And then from Kickstarter, I did receive The Last Lighthouse. That was a Button Shy game that I did pick up from Kickstarter and did get sent. The Button Shy Kickstarters have been very quick to kind of fulfill and cycle through. So very grateful for that too. So that one should also be pretty easy to get to the table, as it's a solo Scott Elms game. So looking forward to it. And then things that came to the table, I did get to play 5 different games since the last time that we talked. The first one being Puppets in High Places, which you will hear me reference in the interview with Amanda towards the back half of this episode. Crystal Palace is another one. I had a game day with Jordan and had a great time playing Crystal Palace, Euphoria, Letter Jam, and Demon Worker. Crystal Palace was very interesting, a very heavy dice placement game. And then dice placement was apparently the flavor of the day. Also playing Euphoria and getting that out to the table too. Both very enjoyable games that I would like to explore some more and probably will be talking about on the next episode. Letter Jam I will be talking about today because I did want to get a review in and talk about this game and my impressions of it, as well as Demon Worker. That will probably be coming up in the next episode. I do want to target all of those. So probably a very review-heavy episode on June 4th. It's coming up. It's going to be June in just a few days, and I'm not prepared. I am not prepared for it to be June already. Again, I do plan on talking about Puppets in High Places alongside With a Smile and a Gun next episode, but I did feel like Amanda's interview should stand on its own. Puppets in High Places will be coming to crowdfunding Kickstarter, I believe, in the coming week. So if you do want to wait on my review to see if it's something that's going to be right for you, I will be featuring it on the episode that drops on the 4th. Listen to the interview and see if you might be interested as well. So let's get to the review portion of the show, and let's talk about Letter Jam. This is a 2 to 6 player game that plays in 45 minutes, and it was designed by Andra Skupy, and the art is by David Jablonski, Radim Pesh, František Sedosek, Lukish Vodika, and Michaela Zauralava. I'm hoping that I got those right. They're all Czech, at least I think. And this was published by Czech Games Edition, or CGE as it's more commonly known. Letter Jam is a 2 to 6 player cooperative word game where players assist each other in composing meaningful words from letters around the table. The trick is holding the letter card so it's only visible to other players and not to you. At the start of the game, each player receives a set of face-down letter cards that can be arranged to form an existing word. The setup can be prepared by using a special card scanning app or by players selecting words for each other, and that's the way that we played yesterday. Each player then puts their first card in their stand facing the other players without looking at it, and the game begins. The game is played in turns. Each turn, players simultaneously search each other player's letters to see what words they can spell out, telling the others the length of the word that they can make up. The player who offers the longest word can then be chosen as a clue giver. The clue giver spells out their clue by putting numbered tokens in front of the other players. Number 1 goes to the player whose letter comes first in the clue, number 2 to the second letter, etc. They can always use a wild card, which can be any letter, but they can't tell others which letter it represents. Each player with a numbered token or tokens in front of them tries to then figure out what their letter is. If they do, they place the card face down before revealing the next letter. At the end of the game, players then rearrange the cards to try to form an existing word. All players then reveal their cards to see if they were successful or not. The more players who have an existing word in front of them, the bigger their collective success. So a couple of clarifications I do want to make on this description. When you are playing with other players that are kind of giving you your word, they do shuffle up those letters, so you're not going to receive them in order. So you will kind of have to figure out what that word is, and it's going to be one of those word scrambles, right? And basically have, to figure that out. The other thing that I do want to kind of highlight is the fact that you will kind of give additional information. So you can say, I can use so many players' letters. I can use these bonus letters, which I'll talk about in a minute. And, I either can use this wild card or I don't use this wild card. Usually you don't want to use that wild card because it is an unknown factor. You do want to reserve that for only very special occasions if you can't find something to talk about. So I got this game on clearance at Barnes & Noble. It has been on my radar for quite a while now as one of the only CGE games I haven't played. I do believe that Kutna Ora has also kind of fallen into that. I haven't had a chance to play that as of yet, but I do plan on playing that at some point. I really enjoyed the deduction aspect of this game. I am a fan of deduction games. Alchemist was one of my top 20 games of all time, and it has stayed in that top 20. And I do just love deduction. Not necessarily social deduction, but just general deduction, logic, that kind of thing. So that really spoke to me. I also loved the system of clue giving, and it really kept everybody involved in the process. You do have these tokens that are in front of you, and you have to make sure that everybody gets a specific number of these red tokens before you can start giving these green tokens, that you kind of unlock in the center of the card. So you do have a little bit of flexibility about who gives clues when, but you can't have it be lopsided, and you can't have it just be one person that's giving all the clues. It did feel like a more cohesive team game. One person's not going to dominate the clue giving and that. And I did find that the clue distribution was fairly even at the end of the game when we got done with it, and we gave quite a few clues. There are extra cards if you are playing with the lower counts that you do basically unlock extra turns or extra clues that you can give out if you can cycle through those cards. And the way that you cycle through those is you involve those in your clue giving. So you make bigger words and you involve those. If you deplete the stack of letters that's down there, you're able to unlock another clue that you can give. Which also, I kind of wanted to get into this now. The fact that you do have a small amount of push your luck with the scoring system, getting the bonus cards at the end, once you do get through your cards, you do have the opportunity to start getting bonus cards that you can add on to the word that you make, or you can also use them as replacements if you're not quite sure about one of your letters. So that is very interesting. That is going to cost a point, because if you have extra guest tokens that you don't need, those are also points that you're burning through. So there is a little bit of push your luck, not very hardcore, vital to the mechanics of the game, but it is just a little extra flavor to this game. So that was pretty interesting. The scoring does feel a little bit loose in how it works. It's almost an add-on. You are trying to basically win as a group. The main gist of the game is, hey, can I deduce enough letters that I can spell out a word? And if I do that, I would consider myself successful. There are points. You get 3 times the original length of the word that somebody picked out for you, and then you get like 1 point extra for each additional letter that you use, and then 1 additional point for every leftover clue token that you have that you haven't used. So not like super cohesive and important, but I felt like unless you're a really, kind of hardcore, I need to know exactly how I did and I need detailed scoring, it's probably not going to bother you too much. You're going to consider it a win if everybody got their words. If not everybody did, you might consider that a loss. I think that's pretty much the long and short of how scoring is kind of really going to work in this game. This does have the feel of a party game if you look at it from the front of the box. I do hesitate to say that. It only goes up to 6, but there's plenty of fun interaction. It is kind of more of a loose, fun game. We did have quite a bit of table talk. amongst us as we were playing. It wasn't completely heads down and serious until we were writing down our words and then trying to figure it out. The conversation did stop a little bit. But it does kind of have that feel of a party kind of weight game, if you will. The components were good. There is an exception that I'll talk about in my next point, but the chips were very satisfying. There were plenty of note sheets that you were able to give out. The chips were a heavier weight poker chip, almost like you'd see in a Splendor. The interesting thing is that the chips all had like little artwork of fruits and that, so it was consistent with the jam theme. So that was duly noted. The big thing that I do have a problem with is the color vision aspect of this game. And all the chips are a different color, but they did get around that with double coding with the number of each letter. So your color does correspond to it, but you do have a number to associate with the placement of each letter. The problem that I ran into is these green and red tokens that CGE still constantly insists on using. And they are very, very similar, especially if somebody has that kind of red-green color vision deficiency, which is a big problem for me. If you do have this, you are going to be frustrated. You will probably need to mark up your game. Fortunately, you could separate the red tokens by putting a little dot on the top and bottom. But this is a persistent problem. This is something that has been brought up that is not fixed and continues to kind of persist throughout every single game that they insist on using with these discs on them. So, again, that is definitely frustrating. I do believe that this is an older title. I think it was the late 2010s that this was produced, if I'm not mistaken, or very early 2020s. So, yeah, it's kind of frustrating, but it is what it is. It is fixable. You can get somebody to separate them, put a dot on, there's not that many of them, and then just let it dry, and you're pretty much good to go. With your copy of it. So for my final thoughts, if you're a fan of word games, there's really few word games that I'm more excited to play than Letter Jam. There's a couple of exceptions. Composition is definitely one of them. I do really like that game. I think that's good. That's really what comes to mind. But this is a very, very interesting deduction game that I really love. This is staying on my keeper shelves for sure. I'm doing a game day tomorrow as part of hosting it for the Pride Network, which is today, if you're listening to this when it drops. And I'm hoping that the establishment that I'm having it at does have this game, because I think it will be interesting for people who come in. I'll be able to teach it easily, and we'll have a good time with that. So definitely staying on my keeper shelves. I would recommend that to somebody who's looking for a cooperative word game. Might have a little bit of extra in there with the deduction, just to make it a little bit spicier. I just really wish that CGE would fix the production of their discs. But unfortunately, that's something that we continue to deal with. And at least in this case, it is something that is fixable on your personal copy. So yeah, that is Letter Jam. And stay tuned, because coming up next, we have an interview with Amanda Vallerand. On today's interview segment, we have Amanda Vallerand, designer of With a Smile and a Gun, Mapping the World, and the upcoming Puppets in High Places, a two-player rondel tug-of-war, which at one point might or might not have been called Two Smiles, Two Gunrius. Amanda, welcome to Cardboard Time.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, that was the title, right?
Yeah. See, I told you I did my research.
Yeah, clearly.
So we'll get into that. I did a little bit of research on you, especially in your blog and that, which I do want to point out to my listeners because I think you have some fantastic advice, and we will talk about that in a little bit. But first of all, can you give the audience a little bit of an intro of who you are and, kind of your history in gaming as well?
Sure. So I am a game designer from Montreal, Canada. I also in 2020 started self-publishing my games with a smile and a gun and started posting on my game design blog. And my history in gaming, when I finished high school, I sort of had too much time on my hands and I got into competitive Monopoly, which is an
And
interesting scene. And then I came back from a tournament have being like very frustrated with how badly I performed, and I went online and tried to see if I could get more videos on YouTube, and I found Scott Nicholson's video. It was called something like a better game to replace Monopoly. I was like, oh, I'm interested. And he said, oh, if you like this part of Monopoly, maybe you should try this game. And one of the things that one of the things it said is if you like the building up of your economy in Monopoly, you should look out Dominion. And so I was like, that sounds cool. And so I got into Dominion, showed that to all my friends, and then got into local game groups to play Dominion with more people. And, one thing led to another. And eventually I had, 300 games in my house. And, same as everyone else from now on.
do in this hobby once you start down the Dominion or Carcassonne or Catan, or in my case, Dungeon Quest rabbit hole, you just wind up
Oh,
with 300 or 1,000 games in your house. I mean, it's just natural. It's fine.
yeah, exactly.
So tell me about this competitive Monopoly scene because I'm kind of fascinated. Like, how does that work? How did the tournaments work?
It was, oh wow, that was 15 years ago now. It was just like a bracket kind of thing where you'd show up to a place, you'd switch from table to table, and it was, if I remember correctly, like you played four games against different opponents, and then first place was worth that many points and so on, and you tried to qualify for the higher level of tournaments, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really like an interesting group of people that went to those kinds of tournaments on the local scene. I'm sure when you get to the higher level, it's very like all cishet white dudes wearing suits kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But and yeah, like a bunch of stuff happening of people like showing up with hats so that they can hide their paper money in their hat so you don't know how much money they have. And I was, weird
Wow.
people. I was 18. I was,
I think that's fascinating, like going to those extremes, because you think of poker players that are trying to hide their hands, so they wear sunglasses. So I would assume that that's
same
kind of
thing.
akin to that. Yeah. Very
Yeah.
fascinating. So, what is your opinion of Monopoly now that you kind of have this, huge background, after you've gotten into the hobby game scene?
So I think that hot take. I think Monopoly is if you play it by the rules and focusing on the game enough that it flows at a nice pace.
Hmm.
It's a pretty interesting negotiation game with way too much like stuck onto it to that weighs it down. But it's like a 6 out of 10 kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree. I went back to my parents, I think it was around Christmas time, and I actually played Monopoly by the rules for the first time in my life. And I had a pretty good time with it. Like, again, like you said, it's a 6 out of 10. It's not going to blow your mind, but I think it's a fair game. It's not this
Yeah.
like awful, awful, awful game that everybody keeps saying that it is.
Yeah, and I think there's something really fascinating about the fact that of course, like it hasn't been around for as long as chess or Go or that kind of stuff. But we consider like chess grandmasters to be like the like an example of how intelligent people can be, and Monopoly is just something that people just assume that it's just a chore that everyone has a box of Monopoly in their house, but it's sort
Mhm.
of just there, and no one ever wants to play it because like it only brings up the worst out of people and stuff like that. But chess is classy and Go is classy, and so yeah, it kind of gets a bad rap from within the community and without.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely does. So now that I've lost my entire audience by saying that Monopoly is an okay game, no, they've been here before. They know what my opinion of it is if they've been listening. So I have to ask, what is with all the Mafia games? And by all, I mean two. You
Right.
have, with a smile and a gun, that's already out. And you have your new game, Puppets in High Places. So why go back to the Mafia theme?
So so I'm not actually that interested in mafia stuff. Like I don't even think I've ever seen like The Godfather. I'm very much just going after this because it is a theme that fits the kind of game I design, which is very. It's not take that, but it's like underhanded interaction. It's sneaky and Machiavellian, which suggests like I played around with a lot of themes for with a smile and a gun, and very few of them ended up selling the kind of experience I wanted, and so I was left with like a game about politics, which as a trans woman in North America is not really something I can get away with.
Hmm.
Or court intrigue in the Renaissance, which is, somewhat overdone, or, mafia stuff. So I ended up going with that, and I remember afterwards thinking like, oh, you know what? It actually like limits a lot of what I can do with this. Like I can't really go to like youth groups and say, hey, here's this game about, selling contraband and like taking over and, potentially killing law enforcers. And I remember regretting that theme, and then I went straight back into it because it just fits so well the
Hmm.
sort of ambiance and atmosphere of the games.
I will say, so you're kind of more mechanics first and then look for a theme after that, if I'm reading that correctly.
I'd say I'm atmosphere first, or like,
Okay.
and
Kind of general
yes,
vibes first.
exactly, vibe, and then
Okay.
from there find the mechanics, find the theme, and put that together.
Awesome. Yeah, and I will definitely say Puppets fits that theme very well as well. While I was playing it, and you were very nice enough to send me a prototype copy, which I was able to play on a lunch break, and we had a great time with it. So yeah, I'll make my plug at the end of the episode, but definitely one that you're probably going to want to check out, especially if you like two-player games. So, yeah, it's kind of fascinating that just kind of fit both those games so very well. But it definitely does. It definitely has that good feel, and I think it definitely works. So, can you tell us a little bit more about your blog, because you have some very interesting points to make? You tend to mention, as a designer, different things than other people tend to bring up in the design space on your blog. And I'd like everybody else to also hear a little bit more about that.
So when I started designing games, years ago, I found a lot of blogs and videos and podcasts talking about either the like first level, like, oh, you're a gamer who wants to make a game. Here's like, don't play test with your mom and don't make 7,000 cards before getting it to the table kind of thing. And that
Hmm.
is, very important, but everybody keeps on saying the same thing and then we're not going forward. And then the other type of stuff I saw is people saying like, "Oh, this is what I'm working on. This is how it's going," and that's fun until like it's all right. Sure, it's the same updates month after month, and it's part of the. I thought that in so I work my day job. I work in IT, and I spend most of my time writing documentation about, oh, we found this issue. This is what we use as a solution. And I was baffled that there was no equivalent in game design, that we all sort of ran into the same kinds of issue. And no one was sharing those things online. We were always staying at like, how do you get a game to the table? How do you pitch a game to a publisher? And there was a huge lack of very like applicable lessons.
Hmm.
And so that's sort of where I came from with my blog. I think my first post is about like how with Mapping the World, the publisher came back to us and said, "Hey, like there's like the players who play further who are further from the first player feel like they're disadvantaged, and the difference between, well, mathematically they're not, and well, they feel like they are, so how do we address their feeling about it, even
Hmm.
if mathematically it's balanced?" And that's the sort of thing that I had never thought of. I'm like, I've read every blog and every book and like everything that you could read back then on game design, and I had never seen that, and I couldn't be the first person to be told that, right?
Hmm.
And so yeah, so that's sort of the level of I try to operate at on the blog of whenever I go, oh, obviously that's the answer to this question, then I post about that.
Yeah, and I think it makes for some very interesting content because I will say I do see a lot of the same things over and over again, which, like you said, are very important for people who are entering the industry to know about. But, you never have that maybe insightful, really in depth kind of questions that don't come up being addressed. And I think that's a great resource for people to look at. And I was really fascinated with it as well. Can you tell me a little bit more about how the Subsurface Games name came about? Because you have kind of a theory behind your games that this actually matches up with, which I found cool.
Right. So in the summer of 2019 was when I decided to do the jump and self-publish, and I was texting with my friend John Merchant, who ended up being the graphic designer on my games, and he had just done the jump and self-published his first game, and I was trying to like he was trying to push me over the edge, and I was at a convention and I was playing a prototype with a friend of mine, and after it, I remember telling my friend, I feel like after this game, we just scratched the tip of the surface of this. We just scratched the tip of the iceberg. And then I sort of had that epiphany, and I texted John and I said, John, can you, like, I know if I don't act on it now, by the time I get back home, it will have left my mind. Can you just, how much would you charge me to make a logo of an iceberg, and we'll figure out the rest later? And the name of Subsurface is actually something in the brainstorming throughout this, something John suggested as a way to avoid a lot of the names we're coming out with were the adjective noun games, which were very, cliche back then. But I thought Subsurface was very on the nose on the, games are a good game, I think, is the kind of game where every game you just go down a little level, but you're always going to be short of the large amount of strategy you can dig out of any one title.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that really, 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 really hit me with a smile and a gun was just the amount of variability that you could have in that game, because you have all the different your setup cards that are different. So the different roles of, I can't remember what they were they the informants,
The shadow
or
cards.
the shadow cards? Yeah. So all of those different cards that would come out, and then all of your different tiles that would come out onto the board are going to be different every single game. So how that looks is going to be completely different from game to game to game, and how you're going to address that challenge, and how that's going to play. There's so much variability there, which is something that I value very highly. Even though I don't get a huge amount of games to the table, more than 2 or 3 times, the ones that I can that really kind of stick with me are those games that really provide that varied experience and provide a lot of that replay value.
Yeah, and I think not only is it more variability and more games before you sort of feel like the games get samey, which I think is very important specifically for like those short two-player games, which you probably are going to always play with the same person or mostly play with the same person, and therefore the game has even more of a chance to get samey, given that like there's like a meta that develops. And but it's also, I loved, again, starting in the hobby with Dominion, the moment where you sit at a table and you set up the game and you go, all right, how is this game going to lean differently than what I usually do? Like, oh, the cards lean, like push for certain strategies, so I'm gonna try to approach this differently. And I tried to get a similar thing with this Mountain, where it's of course not as big of a difference from game to game as it would be in Dominion, but it definitely feels different in a game you play with like the Guardians and the Soulbound infusion, or the infusion that allow you to re-roll dice, and then the assassin going around and taking out the prize tiles from the territories. It leads to very different experiences, you know.
Yeah, so now we're going to get into a little bit more of the heavy stuff. The reason that you have a box of tissues next to you, because we were chatting beforehand, and you said that you wanted to make sure that they were there and available. I'm just going to use an envelope or whatever, I'll deal with it. So you published a game and then started your transition, correct?
Yes.
So what was that experience like? You had this established presence in the industry, and then you transition. Was it a good experience, first of all? And then, I hope that things are better on the other side, but I would be really curious to find out what your experience was.
Yeah. All right. So I will say things are a lot better now than they were before, right? So like, let's get out of the way first. But yeah, like many trans people whose egg cracked as adults, or who like went forward with it as adults, my egg cracked in the fall of 2019. I had just turned 30, and I was getting started in the self-publishing thing, and I sort of was very much in denial because there was impacts on what that meant for my relationship at the time, and all of the usual things that happen when we get into that kind of situations. And so by the time I started, and then there was a pandemic, and then I was full on prepping for the campaign, and so I was able to like sort of ignore all the feelings and all of the little voices in my head, and then when the campaign ended, it sort of all came out because I didn't have something to take all of my focus away from it. And so I ended up realizing that, oh, this is not going to be tenable in the long. Like I cannot just stay in that closet forever, and I kind of need to jump out, regardless of what that means for everything else in my life. But I sort of was struggling with, do I hold off on sending this game to the printer until I figure out my name? Because I knew that the name I had back then was not going to stay, but I didn't know what the new one was going to be. And so, because, it was my first Kickstarter, and it's like, I want to make sure everything gets delivered on time, I sort of assumed that it would be fine and I'd be okay regardless. But then by the time the boxes arrive, I had settled on a name, and so many designers say like, oh, I want to get a game published just to have my name on a box. And I didn't. The game that arrived, like I had 1,000 copies of a game show up on my doorstep with somebody else's name, and that was terrible. That was the worst feeling. It was supposed to be such a celebration, and it really wasn't. And it actually took until last winter for me to finally, like, I localized with this Mountain Gun. We got a partner in Germany, and I finally managed to get a copy of the German version of it with my name on it.
Oh.
4 years later, which is, incredibly meaningful. Yeah. But that was a rough few years. and then going out to conventions and people going, "Oh, can you sign my game?" and going, "Yeah, sure," and then like writing in the cover like, "Oh, I'm sorry for the typo on the front of the box," and all that kind of stuff, and like giving copies of the game to friends, and just giving them like a label with it to cover up the dead name on it. And there's so many places where my name is written in the box. Like
And
on every
on the
rule book
box, rule
twice, and on the
book.
box, and on the side, and on the back, and it's like, gosh, like, can I? And I was terrified with the localized version that they would miss one of it. But yeah, so that was rough. But I mean, since then, I asked my graphic designer, "Can you make a version with my new name? We'll put that on BGG, and we'll just pretend like it was always that was the name that was printed on it, and it was actually a typo, and no one has ever like wondered like, oh, but who is this person on the box, or it was just like it's behind me now, and we're on to better things, and but yeah, it was a rough time.
Yeah, and I like the way that you introduce that in that it's a typo on the box because it's not your name,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
that's really the I think is a great way of looking at that because we have designers that we know of, yourself for sure. Amabel Holland has stuff that's out. Jenna Felly also has stuff that's out, that has typos on the front of the box.
Yeah.
And, it's just a thing that happens. And now you got your name on the box. It's
Yes,
actually
yes.
there.
Now
It's actually correct.
now the next game is gonna definitely have my name on every copy. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And your new game that's coming out is going to have the correct name on it as well. So,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
yeah, we're going to make sure that that's not a typo
Oh yeah. It would be
again.
very weird if.
They just make a typo again.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah. So, in the industry, again, I think there's starting to be a little bit more presence of people who are trans in the industry as well. And I still think that we have a long ways to go. I think it's gotten better. And I always say that we're trying to make things better. We're trying to improve that representation and make sure that people see us because I think it's very important for people who maybe didn't have those role models growing up that they can look at somebody and say, hey, here's a game designer that's trans that's successful. Here's somebody that's in media that's trans that's successful and has built themselves up, to really be something cool. So, what do you think we could do to maybe better improve queer representation in the industry?
That's a very intense question to just broach on as one of like so many topics on a podcast, right? I think that the so I will say yet another hot take. I think that the biggest piece of the puzzle was getting some of us into the door.
Mm-hmm.
Because so much of this industry runs on connections and knowing the right person and all of those things. And of course, when it's an all straight white dude industry, then it mostly is going to get more straight white dudes. And having the Amabel and the Alara and Nikki Valens and the all of the the people from various marginalized communities into the industry is making it easier for for the rest of us to go in. So a lot of the work has already been done before we came up. Now there's a lot of work to do, and I think that a big chunk of it is in making sure that we are organizing events as trans, as queer people, as I mean, neither of us, but like for people of colors and for women to make sure that when you, because I've gone to a lot of like design events where it's all straight white dudes and it's all like very loud and very like testosterone driven
Mm-hmm.
and that's the kind of stuff where the few women that show up don't come back, and the few people of colors that show up don't come back, and making sure that we not only get into the industry but keep on getting other people like us into the door, and having like creating those events and looking for other people who might, because I in the local community we have an event called the Proto de l'année, like the prototype of the year, where a bunch of new designers and their prototypes, and we have a judge panel. And I can tell you that the vast majority of the people who send games are straight white dudes, and they are not ashamed to show their mediocre games and then go around and tell people that they're a game designer. But very few women, queer people, people of color will have that same confidence. And it's why it's like, and obviously we're preaching to the choir. I'm sure that people who listen to your podcast already know that. But it's very important to go and find those people who just need a little bit of a push to get more serious about it, who are just lacking the confidence to go forward, and making sure that they do.
I think that's incredibly insightful. And one thing I kind of wanted to go back to was that maybe you might even call it networking piece, where, you have somebody that is in the industry that can then go back and say, hey, I'm going to make the space better for somebody than it was for me, right?
Yeah.
And kind of bring more people in and make the hobby a little bit safer. I know one thing that Carla Kopp does is organize these different board game events that are, a little bit more quiet at conventions. She always has a table where people can go chill out, decompress, and be away from the hectic atmosphere that is the show floor. And I know that, she kind of needs that for herself as well, and for her to provide that for others, and then also provide, that kind of foot in the door as well while she's doing that, because she's having conversations and she's encouraging people to also, show off what they have and get more involved in the hobby. I think that's one thing that allies can also do, is start to provide those spaces, start to understand, that they are providing something that is very valuable for the marginalized communities that are out there, and it's something that they may not see directly, and they may not see the challenges that we face sometimes, but providing that space and providing, that ability to kind of get your work out there and to kind of say, hey, I'd like to be a voice, I'd like to be more involved, I think is incredibly important. So I think that's a great answer. I know I sprung that on you as kind of a little bit of a heavy question, but I think you did great with it, and I think it's incredibly insightful.
I think, it's like none of us are social workers or like sociologists, or we really have not much of an idea what we're talking about, right? But it is still, in the grand scheme of things, it's just the math of, if you show up to an event and no one there looks like you, and people are hostile towards you because you don't look like them, you're not going to come back. And then if no one ever comes back, well,
Yeah.
that's exactly how you get to a world where, I don't know how many of the like BGG top 1,000 games have women designers on.
Right.
But
Hargrave will tell you for sure.
oh, exactly. Yeah.
Because we had that conversation. So no, that's an incredibly good point. And it's funny to hear sometimes people say, hey, we want more marginalized people in this space, but nobody wants to show up. And
Yeah.
I just look at them and I say, Why do you think that is? Did you ever do any sort of internalization about that and say
Well,
maybe there's
we
an
are not as
opportunity there?
smart as men, so that really
Oh,
makes a
that's
difference.
true. That's true. My IQ went down like 50 points when I
Oh
transitioned.
yeah, every pill of Spyro
Just takes it down just a little bit more.
just a little bit. Yeah, it's really, and people say, "Oh, how do you get women to play with you and everything?" I'm like, "That, how is it that you can't find a woman to join your game group?" And most of my game groups are mostly non-dudes. Like, what do you think is the difference between those things? Like,
Yeah, when I look at my statistics and it's mostly women that listen to the podcast, there's a
yeah,
reason for that. You know, you look at those demographics and they do tell you something. I do have a funny story about,
okay,
what we were talking about before, and it's kind of tangential, but I will make a point here. I went and changed over my car insurance when I transitioned because I had to update my name, my gender marker, everything else on my insurance. My rate went up by 33%
huh,
by changing my gender marker and my name.
interesting.
Yeah.
No
So that's
explanation, just
no
it's
no
more expensive
explanation,
now.
just you're a woman now and you suck at driving apparently.
Well, it's a dark world. It's a dark world we live in, Arwen.
There's some hard truths I had to come to realize about myself that my driving got worse. Actually, if you ask my fiance, she would say that my driving actually got better. I'm less aggressive and nicer on the road, and I use my horn sometimes as opposed to flipping people off. So that's great.
Yeah. And isn't that really like a man would say that you got worse, and a woman would say you got better. It doesn't.
Yeah.
Isn't that just exactly what is wrong with the world nowadays?
I'm just saying.
Long sigh.
Yeah. So what do you do outside of gaming for your other hobbies, if you have any?
Cooking. I love making food so much.
Oh, I do
Probably, I
too.
would say more than games.
What do you like
It's
to cook?
so I just recently got into baking because why not, right? Bread is so expensive nowadays. Why not make my own? And so, like, now I make sure that I always have like a thing of cookie dough in the fridge so that whenever I want homemade cookies, I can just pop them in the oven and now we have cookies. And same thing, like, oh, we're out of bread. You should go to the grocery store. No, 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 no. Wait a second. We're going to be okay. I'll just make a loaf, pop that in the oven. So yeah, that's my obsession at the moment is figuring out how much to bake so that we never run out of bread
Yeah.
and we never run out of cookies or
Yeah.
brownies or all of the nice things in life.
And let me tell you that freshly baked bread, there
There's
is
nothing better.
almost nothing better than that. It's just so good.
So one thing that I try and that I'm still really struggling with is homemade pizza
Ooh.
is something. It's an adventure to make, but wow, is it worth it? It's yeah.
Do you have like a particular style? Like do like a Detroit style or just like a regular round pizza, or how do you
I'm
usually
Canadian. We only have one type of pizza here.
Canadian pizza?
Yeah, whatever the pizza is that I can put pineapples on, that's the one I make.
People talk about pineapple on pizza and they don't
Not
know what
up
they're
here.
missing. People don't know what they're missing out
Pizza need
on.
it. Yeah. Why would you? Pineapple is delicious.
And pepperoni, best combo.
Yeah.
You got
Yeah.
you got the sweet, you got the spicy. People
I'm
don't
right there
know what
with
they're
you.
missing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
For
we're on
sure.
the same page.
Yeah.
I knew I liked you. So, what else is on your table besides what you are currently working on now?
Um. Oh, so one thing that we've been playing a bunch is Agricola, which is just, I hadn't played that game in like 10 years.
Hmm.
And a friend of mine, so I got married last September,
Congrats.
and thank you. And a friend of mine gave us a copy of Agricola as a wedding gift. And, it's been almost a year, so now it's time to get it off the shelf of aspiration. And we got into that, and it's so good. It's
Hmm.
so, so good. We played like 3 games this week of Agricola. It's still on the table waiting for us to play another one, probably as soon as we finish with the.
I need to go back to that because and I did top 20 last night, games of all time, and Agricola
Okay.
was one that I actually got rid of out of my collection in favor of Caverna and Feast for Odin. And I need to go back on BGA and play Agricola a little bit more because I have heard multiple people through this top 20 process that the Tabletop Express channel is doing talk about Agricola again. And it's very interesting to hear people bring it back up again after all these years as well.
Yeah. And I sort of. So my wife wasn't a gamer when was a more casual gamer when we started dating. And so it was a great experience to like get them up to speed with all of the entire hobby, right? And so I showed them Agricola this week, and like, oh, that's interesting. That's like, and of course, all of the Rosenberg titles are very similar. So it's like,
Mm.
oh wait, maybe we should. That reminds me, like, we should play Le Havre again. And it's like, oh yeah, sure, let's play Le Havre just for the comparison, right? And oh, let's take out Iranian Burger Canal, and oh, why don't we try to get someone to lend us a copy of Feast for Odin and convert? And it's yeah, it's an interesting thing to dig back into those old classics that, sometimes are classics for a reason.
And then sometimes they don't age very well at all.
Yeah.
There are
Yeah,
times.
maybe if we were to take out a Monopoly today, maybe I wouldn't give it a 6 out of 10 anymore.
I still contend it's at least a
Okay,
five and
okay.
a half. Like it's a solid, like you said, negotiation game. The roll and move is a little bit dated. Like that could go for me. I could really care less about it, but no, it's an okay game. It's fine.
Yeah.
It's not a problem. So the whole reason that we're chatting is you have a upcoming game called Puppets in High Places. It is coming to crowdfunding. Can you tell the audience a little bit about it and what your plans are for crowdfunding this?
So, Puppets in High Places is a 2-player game that lasts about 30 minutes. It's set in a fantastic noir prohibition era where players take on the roles of mob bosses who are trying to get a foothold in City Hall and doing so by bribing and corrupting the various VIPs of the town. So mechanically, it's a game with where you go through the streets, which is a rondel, to get all the resources you need to go bribe the officials. However, the game has a fantastical element where you have keys to the city, which allow you to change the rondel and modify the available actions or where certain actions are. And then you go to the speakeasy, which is this tug of war thing a la Watergate, but where the VIPs are represented by dice, with the value of the dice being how influential that VIP is. And so you can not only pull them and push them to gain their influence, but also modify their value and, sometimes play defense by just lowering the value of a die your opponent's about to score. And like we said up top, it's very much a game that it's not a take that game, but it's a game that plays on the zero sum nature of a 2-player game. It's a game where any point you don't make is a point that I make.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going through underhanded methods to try to get your stuff to happen. There's a little bit of I like in games. To me, the right metric for how good a game is how many times you get cursed at while you're playing. And by that metric, this is an excellent game. one of the things that we keep on talking about is that it's a two-player game. There also is a solo variant for it that is just as interesting, but there's no one to curse at you, though, if you played solo.
Yeah, so it's good, but it doesn't quite have that, like, ambiance and atmosphere. You could have somebody cursing at you in the background, just play recording, I suppose.
Yeah, I was thinking about making an expansion that is just like insults on cards.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe with a QR code you can scan to get someone to say it.
Oh,
yeah.
Stretch goal?
Oh, possibly.
You could record it, and just have it play when you go and you scan the QR code. You could just have your voice and...
Oh, exactly. Yeah,
you could yell at the players.
Always. So we're going on Kickstarter with that on May 28th. And I say we as if this was an enormous team. I try to keep the games affordable because I hate the fact that games are now $200. So I think the price, don't quote me on this, even if this is a podcast, but the price we're working off of right now is $34 Canadian, which I think is 27 or 28 US.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, we're trying to make this a affordable thing that everyone could enjoy on their lunch break.
Well, it's one of those experiences because I have been able to play, both with a smile and a gun, and then two smiles, two gunrius, or puppets in high places. Go to the blog if you want to know what the joke is. Just go to the blog. It's great. But I will definitely say that, one of the big things for me, and I did mention this in my top 20, I really do like a, small box game that does deliver a big box experience. And I think that both of your games in that series definitely do that. It's been intriguing playing those both. I'm looking forward to playing more. And I definitely, I don't recommend things lightly. If I don't like it, I don't talk about it. People know that have listened to the show for a long time, and I've liked both of them, so.
I don't know if the mic caught that. I'm just applauding myself. Yeah, it's a nice feeling to get you to say those things about my game. I really worked hard on those, and it's nice to see other people appreciate them as much as I did.
So how can people get a hold of you on socials?
So I am not super active on social media anymore. I basically just go on Twitter to retweet stuff, and that's pretty much it. I am somewhat active on Blue Sky. My handle is Subsurface Amy, SUB Surface AMY. And aside from that, the best place to hear me talk, and it's more of a one-directional thing, is on my blog, which is subsurfacegames.ca, because again, I'm from the polar ice cap.
The Great White North.
Yeah.
The truly nicest land in all of this planet Earth.
Of course, yes.
Which I may have to move to someday. Who knows?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
All of us. We'll just get a trans commune somewhere up north.
That sounds amazing. We'll put a Little Timmy's. We'll put a Harvey's. We'll get a Costco there. It'll be great. We'll Subaru dealership.
Costco. Wow, we need a lot of us to have a Costco.
I think there's a lot of us. I mean, honestly, if things get bad enough, we need a home. Just saying.
Yeah.
I need a 30-pack of toilet paper because I go through it like crazy. It was probably too much information.
That's why I brought the tissues to wipe my tears, not the toilet paper. It's better.
Exactly.
Redirection.
Well, Amanda, thank you so much for being on today's show. It's been a blast. And please do go check out the Kickstarter on May 28th. It will be a week from when this episode launches. Definitely check that out. Amanda, thanks again.
Thanks for having me.
And I think that will do it for us today. If you do want to know anything more about Cardboard Time, you can go to the website at cardboardtime.com. I just updated it with my updated top 20 games of all time that you can listen to if you look it up on YouTube on the Tabletop Express channel. So that was very fun to do with Brian Chandler. If you haven't seen it, take a look. But I did put links to purchase all of those games if you are interested in the website as well. Our Instagram is at cardboard_time. Our Blue Sky is at cardboard time. The Discord on the Tabletop Express server, if you haven't joined us there, you can head to cardboardtime.com for a link, or you can email for an invite to the server as well. And as always, any questions, suggestions, or ideas for discussion topics, you can email those right off to cardboardtime@gmail.com. So thanks again for listening, and we'll see you around the table in 2 weeks for another episode of Cardboard Time.